The resonance fault had defeated 4 senior acoustic engineers over 9 days. It sat hidden inside the S9 demonstration unit like a flaw only one person in the building could name, and the global product launch was 72 hours away. Then Callum arrived. He had not been assigned to it. He had no clearance to enter the anechoic chamber. He was only a floor-level calibration technician, a single father running overnight shifts to keep his 6-year-old daughter in the same school she had attended since her mother died. But he walked into that chamber in the middle of the night and corrected the fault in 6 hours. The following morning, CEO Nora terminated his employment for unauthorized access. She did not know that Callum had designed the acoustic architecture of that system himself. The man they dismissed as a technician was the one who had built the silence they were selling. Callum's apartment was on the 13th floor of a building that had been modern once and had since become simply familiar. Small, clean, organized with the economy of a man who had learned that objects take up space, and space is a resource. The kitchen table held a spiral notebook, a mug, and a small stuffed elephant named Hum that belonged to his daughter Iris and had been left there that morning when Iris decided Hum needed to guard the orange juice. Callum had not moved it. Iris was 6 years old and took mornings seriously. She sat across from him each day with a question ready. "What does silence sound like?" she asked on a Tuesday in March. Callum set down his coffee. "It sounds like everything stopped at exactly the same time," he said. "On purpose." Iris placed Hum beside the bowl as a witness. Then she went back to her cereal. He dropped her at the neighbors at 6:40 and walked to the parking structure without looking at the building across the street, where his name had once appeared on a patent filing and now did not. Harman Precision Audio occupied 6 floors of the Meridian complex, a company 11 years into building a reputation for engineering vehicle sound environments that could not be heard. Active noise cancellation for high-performance engines. Sound shaped and delivered at exactly the frequency the driver expected. Calibrated to match the emotional promise of a $200,000 purchase price. Nora Webb had been appointed CEO 14 months ago at 31. Sharp, credentialed, background in product strategy. She had not come from engineering. She was learning its language well enough to navigate it, not yet well enough to know when a word was being used incorrectly. The Meridian S9 was the largest launch in the company's history, 4 years in development. 17 demonstration vehicles for a global press event on Friday. Then 11 days before launch, the fault appeared. At 2,200 RPM, a standing wave formed in the secondary dampening layer and produced a sound the S9 was specifically engineered to eliminate. It lasted 0.4 seconds. It was enough. Lead engineer Daniel ran the diagnostic suite for 3 days. External consultants arrived, conferred in low voices, and delivered a report using within acceptable variance parameters as a way of saying they could not find the source. Gareth, the head of product, outlined 3 options: delay the launch, suppress the fault through a manual EQ override that would not survive production, or find the source. Nora said, "Find the source." Gareth looked at her with the expression of a man waiting for the new executive to arrive at the same conclusion he already held. Callum heard the meeting through the ventilation grid above his calibration bench. He set down the frequency analyzer, said nothing, picked up his notebook, wrote 3 lines, closed it. That evening, after Iris was asleep and Hum was restored beside her pillow, Callum sat at the kitchen table and drew. His hand moved without hesitation. Lines precise and specific in the way that comes not from research, but from memory. He worked until 12:30. At 1:47 in the morning, he drove back. His floor-level card opened the calibration lab. The chamber door required senior engineering credentials. Callum had not carried those in 4 years, but the access protocol ran on a legacy system not fully migrated during the restructuring, and the credential code from his previous role still worked. The chamber reduced ambient noise to levels that felt physically different from ordinary silence. A room that didn't echo, didn't breathe. Callum stood at the entry for 20 seconds, eyes closed. Then he went to work. The S9's secondary dampening layer was a composite assembly integrating 3 components: The documentation passed to subsequent engineering teams had been technically complete but architecturally abbreviated. What it did not convey was the relationship between the phase alignment of the dampening membrane and the expansion coefficient of the firewall bracket at operating temperature. At cold start, the assembly behaved perfectly. At sustained running temperature above 40 minutes, the bracket expanded by 0.7 millimeters. That shifted the membrane's resonant frequency from 2,600 Hz to 2,190 Hz. At 2,200 RPM, those values converged and produced the standing wave. It had not appeared in simulation because the simulation ran cold. Callum had flagged this in a design note during the original build phase. The note was in a folder on a server archived during the documentation migration. The categorization had been entered by Gareth. He made 4 specific adjustments to the contact pressure at the primary seam using a shim component fabricated from a specification he carried in memory. He reassembled the housing, ran a thermal cycle, brought the unit to operating temperature, and tested at 2,200 RPM. The standing wave was gone. He packed his tools, logged out at 4:12, and drove home. He made coffee. He sat at the kitchen table. He did not sleep. At 6:30, Iris appeared with Hum under one arm. "Did you fix it?" she asked. "Yes." She put Hum on the table as a witness. She went back to her cereal. Daniel ran the morning diagnostic at 7:15 and stood at the console without speaking. The resonance fault was not present. The S9 profile was the cleanest result in the project's history. He called 2 engineers over to confirm. They confirmed it. Nobody knew what to say. Gareth was at the access log by 7:45. He had a folder on Nora's desk by 8 o'clock. Nora watched the chamber footage on the tablet. The figure moved without hesitation, with the certainty of someone who had been there before, many times before. "Is the system functional?" she asked. "That isn't the point. 3 days from a global product event. Unauthorized access. Liability exposure." She looked at the fault report, then at the footage. She signed the termination notice. Callum stood in her office without sitting. "Can you explain this?" "I corrected the resonance fault. You didn't have authorization to enter that chamber. The launch is in 3 days. That isn't what I asked you." He looked at her, not with defiance, with the stillness of a man who had already understood the outcome. "Before you run the demonstration on Friday," he said, "read the original design note for the secondary dampening assembly. Not the current documentation. The original. The shim specification needs to be in the production build or the fault returns at 40,000 miles in every unit." Then he walked out. He collected Iris at 3:30. She looked up from a drawing with the evaluative calm of a 6-year-old assessing whether early pickup was good news or complicated news. "You're early. I don't have work anymore." She adjusted her grip on Hum's ear. "Is that okay?" He crouched to her level. "We're going to find something new." "Will the new place have quiet rooms?" He almost smiled. "Every important place does." That evening after Iris slept, Callum sat at the kitchen table. He thought about Claire, who had died in a road accident when Iris was 8 months old, when he had been in a technical review in Stuttgart and the call had come at 11:40 p.m. He had been on a flight home within 4 hours and out of his position within 60 days. He had simply found himself unable to be in a building where his name had been quietly removed while he was still inside it. He had come back because the fault was there, not for anything else. Nora read the original design note at 10:15 that night. Author, C. Webb, Senior Acoustic Design Engineer. 4 years and 3 months earlier, she read it twice, then a third time. The resonance fault at 2,200 RPM was described with precise technical language in paragraph 2. The mechanism, the expansion coefficient, the phase convergence, the corrective shim specification, all of it. Written by someone who had understood the problem before it existed because they had built the system from the foundation up. The note had not been included in the working file because the archive migration had categorized it as a superseded draft. The categorization had been entered by Gareth. She drove herself to his building. The buzzer brought a small voice. "Hello? I'm looking for your father." A pause. "He's at the table. I'll tell him." Callum came to the door in the same clothes. eyes carrying the specific darkness of someone who had been awake past the point where it showed. He looked at her without surprise. She sat across from him at the kitchen table. Hum was on the counter. The notebook was closed. "I read the original note," she said. "I fired you before I understood what you had built and why you were there. I need to apologize for that." He was quiet for a moment. "The shim specification needs to be in the production documentation, every unit. If it isn't, the fault returns at 40,000 miles. I know. That's why I'm here. I'll come back for the production documentation, not for the launch, because if the specification isn't transferred correctly, drivers will hear something they paid $200,000 not to hear, and the people who built this with me will have their names on a product that fails." He looked at her. "That's the reason, not the apology." Iris appeared at the doorway in her pajamas with Hum under her arm. "You came very late," she said to Nora. "I know, I should have come earlier." Iris considered this sufficient. She looked at her father. "Is she staying?" "No. Go back to bed." Iris retreated without argument, which told Callum everything about what she thought of the visitor. He was at the facility at 7:30 the following morning. He spent 4 hours building a complete technical specification for the secondary dampening assembly. The shim component, contact pressure tolerances, thermal expansion parameters, operating temperature threshold. He wrote it clearly, exactly, without abbreviation, in the language of someone who understood that documentation is not a formality. It is the only way a design outlives the person who made it. Daniel came to his bench at noon and set a coffee down without being asked. "I read the original note last night. I've been working from the abbreviated file for 2 years. I didn't know there was a deeper document." "There usually is," Callum said. "The launch ran on Friday. 17 vehicles, 17 journalists. Not one of them heard anything at 2,200 RPM except the precise engineered quiet the S9 had been built to deliver." At the board meeting Monday, Gareth distributed responsibility across the documentation migration process and the archive categorization protocol. The language was familiar to anyone who had heard an organization explain a failure without assigning it. Nora stood. 3 days before our most significant product launch, I terminated the employment of the engineer who had designed the core architecture of the product we were launching. I did it based on an access log and a liability assessment, without reading a single word of his technical record. The fault he corrected that night would have appeared in every production unit at 40,000 miles. It would have cost this company its partnership and its reputation. I was wrong, and I am saying that in front of all of you. The room was quiet. Callum, at the far end of the table, gave a single small nod. He received the apology with the quiet of a person who has set something down and has no interest in picking it back up. What he asked for before any title or compensation, a revised documentation protocol requiring original design engineers to personally verify specifications before archive migration. A direct escalation path for calibration technicians to raise product integrity concerns without routing through department heads. And a standing access provision for any engineer who had contributed original design work to review current production documentation at any time. The room understood. A man given significant leverage who had chosen to spend it entirely on structures that would protect the next person from being where he had been. Nora accepted all 3 without modification. His name was restored to the design authorship record the following week, not as a correction, as a restoration. He came home that evening at 5:15. Iris heard the key and pulled him to the kitchen table where she had laid out her drawing materials with formal precision. "I drew the quiet room," she said. He sat down and looked at it. The anechoic chamber, in Iris's particular visual language, all circles and absorbed lines going nowhere, which was, he thought, exactly right. "That's very accurate," he said. She sat across from him with Hum positioned between them. "Is the new place good?" she asked. He looked at the drawing. "It's the same place," he said. "It's just different now." She accepted this with the patience of someone who understood that some things resolved slowly and that the resolution was worth waiting for. After dinner, after the reading and the good night and the stillness that came when she finally slept, Callum sat at the kitchen table with the notebook open. He did not draw anything technical. He sat with the quiet, not fighting it, not filling it. Just occupying it, the way a room holds silence after the last note of something is finished and before anyone has decided what comes next.